The whispers in the church fell silent as Zara Jameson clutched her bouquet with trembling hands, watching the minutes tick by on the ornate clock at the back of the sanctuary. 1 hour had passed since her groom was due to arrive, and the pitying glances from the wedding guests told her what her heart refused to accept: Theodore Blackwell wasn't coming. It was May 1878 in Williams, Arizona territory, and being left at the altar was a humiliation no woman could easily bear. "Perhaps there's been some accident," her father whispered, his face taut with both concern and rage as he stood beside her at the front of the church. The church door creaked open, and everyone turned, hoping to see the tardy groom. Instead, Theodore's young cousin hurried down the aisle, clutching a letter with the Blackwell family seal. As the boy handed it to her, Zara's heart plummeted. "I'm sorry, Miss Jameson," the boy mumbled. Not meeting her eyes, with shaking fingers, Zara broke the seal and unfolded the single page. The words blurred before her eyes. "I cannot go through with this marriage. I have taken the stage to California. Please forgive me." The letter slipped from her fingers as a collective gasp filled the church. Humiliation burned through her like wildfire. 4 years of courtship, months of wedding preparations, her hopes and dreams all reduced to a hastily scribbled note. "Zara." Her mother's voice cracked as she reached for her daughter, but Zara couldn't bear the pity. With a strangled sob, she gathered her white satin skirts and fled through the side door of the church, ignoring the calls of her parents and friends. The May sunshine mocked her as she stumbled blindly through the churchyard, her veil catching on a rose bush and tearing away. She had nearly reached the street when a strong hand caught her arm, halting her flight. Zara whirled around, ready to shake off whoever dared to stop her, and found herself staring into the steel-blue eyes of Flynn Decker. Everyone in Williams knew Flynn Decker tall, rugged, with a reputation as one of the most skilled cowboys in the territory. He worked at the Diamond Bar Ranch outside town and rarely mingled with townsfolk except on Saturday nights at the saloon. What few people knew was that he and Zara had grown up as neighbors until her family moved into their grand house in town when her father's mercantile business flourished. "Let me go," she demanded, mortification burning her cheeks. Flynn's expression was unreadable as he studied her tear-stained face. Then, with deliberate slowness, he removed his black Stetson, revealing hair the color of burnished copper. "His loss," Flynn said simply, his voice low and steady, "is my invitation." "What?" Zara stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Theodore Blackwell was a fool to leave you standing there, Zara Jameson." Flynn's eyes held hers, unwavering. "Always has been a fool, far as I reckon." "You have no right," she began, indignation momentarily overshadowing her heartbreak. "No, I don't," he agreed. "But I do have a wagon, and you look like you could use a ride away from here." Zara glanced back at the church where people were beginning to spill outside, their curious eyes searching for the abandoned bride. Her parents would be looking for her, wanting to comfort her, but the thought of facing everyone's pity was unbearable. "Where would we go?" she asked, surprising herself. A faint smile touched Flynn's lips. "Wherever you want, though I reckon going home isn't on that list right now." He was right. She couldn't face her family home with its rooms full of wedding gifts and her mother's careful preparations for the wedding breakfast that would never happen. "Take me to Willow Creek," she said suddenly. It was a spot several miles outside town where she used to go as a child, a peaceful place where the desert bloomed beside a small stream. Without another word, Flynn guided her toward his wagon parked near the church. He helped her climb up, mindful of her wedding dress, then covered her with a clean blanket from the back. "To hide you from prying eyes," he explained, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. As the wagon pulled away from the church, Zara felt the tears she'd been fighting begin to fall. She didn't care that Flynn Decker could see her cry. Nothing mattered except getting away from the ruins of what should have been the happiest day of her life. "He wrote that he's going to California," she said after they had left town behind, not knowing why she was telling Flynn this. "Then he's a bigger fool than I thought," Flynn replied, keeping his eyes on the road. "Leaving the most beautiful woman in the territory for whatever he thinks he'll find in California." Despite everything, a small, watery laugh escaped her. "You shouldn't say such things." "It's just the truth," Flynn said with a shrug. "I've always been one for speaking plain." They traveled in silence after that, the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of wagon wheels the only sounds. The familiar landscape of scrubby desert, dotted with saguaro cacti and mesquite trees, rolled past as they headed toward Willow Creek. When they arrived, Flynn helped her down from the wagon. Zara stood awkwardly in her wedding finery, feeling absurdly out of place among the desert wildflowers and cottonwood trees that lined the creek. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said stiffly, uncertain what to do next. Flynn nodded, then reached into the wagon and pulled out a small bundle. "Brought some food. Thought you might be hungry." Only then did Zara realize she hadn't eaten since the early morning, too nervous about the wedding to manage more than a few bites. Flynn spread a blanket on the ground beneath a cottonwood tree and laid out a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried apples. "It's not a wedding feast," he said apologetically. "It's perfect," she replied, carefully arranging her voluminous skirts as she sat down. They ate in companionable silence, the gentle sound of the creek washing over them. Gradually, Zara felt her rigid posture easing, the knot of humiliation in her chest loosening just enough to allow her to breathe properly. "What will you do now?" Flynn asked as they finished their meal. Zara stared at the rippling water. "I don't know, go back eventually, face everyone." She shuddered at the thought. "Williams has a short memory," Flynn said. "Something else will come along to gossip about soon enough." "Perhaps," she agreed, though she doubted it. In a town the size of Williams, being left at the altar would mark her for years to come. "What about you? Why were you at the church today?" Flynn's gaze shifted away from her. "Just happened to be in town." Zara sensed there was more to it than that but didn't press him. Instead, she reached up and began removing the pins from her elaborately arranged hair, letting the dark chestnut waves fall around her shoulders. "Better," she murmured, massaging her scalp where the pins had pulled. Flynn watched her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable but somehow didn't. There was something steady about Flynn Decker, something reliable that she'd never noticed before. "You deserve better than Theodore Blackwell," he said abruptly. "Always have." The directness of his statement startled her. "You don't know anything about us." "I know he cared more about your father's business connections than he did about you," Flynn replied. "And I know he never once made you laugh the way you used to laugh when we were children." Zara stared at him, surprised that he remembered those days when they would play together in the creek, back before social standing became important and their paths diverged. "That was a long time ago," she said softly. "Not so long." Flynn's eyes held hers. "Not long enough to forget." Something stirred in Zara's heart, a recognition of the boy who had once been her dearest friend, before society decreed that the daughter of a successful merchant shouldn't associate with the son of a ranch hand. "I should get back," she said, suddenly unnerved by the direction of her thoughts. Flynn nodded and began gathering up their simple picnic. As they prepared to leave, Zara caught sight of her reflection in the creek water, a bride without a wedding, hair tumbling loose around a face flushed not with happiness but with tears and sun. "Wait," she said impulsively. She gathered up her trailing veil, which she had retrieved from the rosebush before fleeing, and walked to the edge of the creek. With deliberate movements, she let it drop into the water, watching as the current caught the delicate lace and carried it away. "Good riddance," Flynn said quietly beside her. Zara found herself smiling, a small, fragile thing, but a smile nonetheless. "Take me home, Flynn," she said. "I think I'm ready to face them now." The sun was beginning to set as Flynn's wagon approached the Jameson home, a two-story clapboard house on the respectable side of Williams. Lights blazed from every window, and Zara could see figures moving about inside. "They're worried," she said, guilt mingling with her heartbreak. "Of course they are," Flynn replied. "They love you." He brought the wagon to a stop a short distance from the house. "Would you rather I didn't take you to the door? Might cause more talk." Zara hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't care about talk anymore. I've had enough of worrying what people think." A ghost of a smile touched Flynn's lips. "That's the Zara I remember." He jumped down from the wagon and came around to help her. As his hands closed around her waist to lift her down, Zara found herself looking into his face, really looking for the first time in years. The boyish features she remembered had been replaced by a man's strong jawline and weathered skin bronzed by the Arizona sun. Only his eyes remained the same clear blue and honest. "Thank you," she said as her feet touched the ground, though she wasn't sure if she was thanking him for the ride, the picnic, or for being there when she needed someone most. "Anytime," he replied simply, releasing her waist but not stepping back. The front door of the house flew open and Zara's mother rushed out. "Zara, oh thank heavens, we've been so worried." Zara turned toward her mother's voice but looked back at Flynn. "Will I see you again?" "Count on it," he said, settling his hat back on his head. "Remember what I said, Zara Jameson. His loss is my invitation." With that, he climbed back onto the wagon and drove away as Zara's mother enveloped her in a fierce embrace. "Where have you been? We've been frantic," her mother demanded, leading her toward the house. "Getting some perspective," Zara answered, watching Flynn's wagon disappear into the gathering dusk. Inside, her father paced the parlor, stopping short when he saw her. "Zara," he breathed, relief evident on his face. "I'm sorry to have worried you," she said, suddenly exhausted by the day's events. "It's that scoundrel Blackwell who should be sorry," her father growled. "If I ever lay eyes on him again, it doesn't matter," Zara interrupted. "He's gone, and that's that." She paused, surprised to find that she meant it. The sharp sting of humiliation remained, but something else was beginning to take its place, a sense of having narrowly escaped a grave mistake. Her mother fussed around her, helping her out of the wedding gown and into a simple day dress, all the while alternating between sympathy and indignation on her daughter's behalf. "Was that Flynn Decker who brought you home?" her father asked when she came back downstairs. "Yes," Zara answered, bracing herself for disapproval. To her surprise, her father merely nodded. "Decent of him. Always was a hard worker, that boy, even if his circumstances weren't the best." "He was kind to me today," Zara said, feeling a need to defend Flynn though no accusation had been made. "Well, that's something to be grateful for, I suppose," her mother said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea of her daughter spending the afternoon with Flynn Decker. Later that night, lying in her bed, Zara replayed the events of the day. The humiliation of being abandoned at the altar still burned, but it was Flynn's words that lingered in her mind as she drifted off to sleep. "His loss is my invitation." The next morning, Zara awoke with a resolve she hadn't expected to feel. She would not hide away in shame. Theodore Blackwell had made his choice, and now she would make hers to hold her head high and face the town. She dressed in a simple blue calico dress and pinned her hair in a practical style. When she came downstairs, her mother looked up from preparing breakfast with concern in her eyes. "Are you sure you want to go out today, dear? No one would think less of you for staying home after yesterday." "I'm certain," Zara replied firmly. "I need a few things from the store, and I won't give the gossips the satisfaction of thinking I'm too ashamed to show my face." Her father looked up from his newspaper with approval. "That's my girl." Stepping out onto the dusty main street of Williams, Zara felt the stares immediately. Women whispered behind their hands, and men averted their eyes awkwardly. She kept her back straight and her gaze forward as she made her way to Johnson's general store. Inside, Mrs. Johnson fell silent mid-sentence when the bell above the door announced Zara's arrival. The two women she'd been speaking with turned to stare openly. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson," Zara said pleasantly, acting as though nothing was amiss. "I need some thread and a new set of needles, if you please." "Of course, Miss Jameson," Mrs. Johnson replied, recovering quickly. "And may I say it's good to see you out and about. We were all so sorry about, that is to say." "Thank you for your concern," Zara cut in smoothly, unwilling to discuss Theodore's desertion. "The thread, please." As Mrs. Johnson gathered her purchases, the bell above the door rang again. Zara turned to see Flynn Decker enter the store, ducking his tall frame under the doorway. He nodded politely to the ladies before his eyes found Zara's. "Miss Jameson," he greeted her with a tip of his hat. "Mr. Decker," she replied, aware of Mrs. Johnson and her companions watching the exchange with keen interest. "Fine day," Flynn commented, moving to stand beside her at the counter. "Yes, it is," she agreed, feeling an unexpected flutter in her stomach at his proximity. Mrs. Johnson returned with Zara's purchases, her eyes darting curiously between them. "Will there be anything else, Miss Jameson?" "No, thank you." Zara paid for her items and gathered them up. "I'm heading back toward your end of town," Flynn said casually. "Would you care for an escort?" The whispers from the corner of the store grew louder, and Zara knew that by noon, the entire town would be talking about Flynn Decker walking her home. For a moment, she hesitated, years of proper upbringing warring with her newfound determination not to care what others thought. "Thank you, Mr. Decker," she finally said. "I would appreciate that." Outside in the bright morning sunshine, Flynn offered his arm, and after a brief hesitation, Zara placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. They walked in silence for a few moments before Flynn spoke. "You're brave coming into town today." "Not brave," she corrected him. "Just stubborn." That drew a laugh from him, a rich, warm sound that she found surprisingly pleasant. "Always were stubborn, even as a little girl. Remember that time you insisted on crossing Willow Creek on that fallen log, even though it had rained for days and the water was high?" Zara smiled at the memory. "I fell in and ruined my new dress. Mother was furious. And I fished you out and got a switching for leading you into mischief," Flynn added, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'd forgotten that part," she admitted. "I'm sorry." Flynn shrugged. "Worth it. You were always worth whatever trouble came my way." The simple statement hung in the air between them as they continued walking. Zara found herself studying his profile, noting the straight line of his nose, the firm set of his jaw. How had she never noticed how handsome he had become? "What will you do now?" he asked, breaking into her thoughts. "About Theodore, you mean?" she sighed. "There's nothing to do. He's made his choice." "No," Flynn said, stopping to face her. "About you. What will you do now for yourself?" Zara blinked, surprised by the question. No one had asked her that, not her parents, not her friends. Everyone assumed she would simply continue as before, perhaps eventually marrying someone else suitable. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've spent the past 4 years planning to be Theodore's wife. I never thought beyond that." Flynn's blue eyes studied her intently. "You could do anything, you know. You're smart, Zara. Always were the brightest in school. Women in Williams don't have many options," she reminded him. "Then maybe you need to look beyond Williams," he suggested quietly. They had reached her house, and Zara reluctantly withdrew her hand from his arm. "Thank you for walking with me." Flynn tipped his hat. "My pleasure. I meant what I said yesterday, Zara. I'd like to see you again properly, not just by chance in town." Her heart quickened. "Flynn, not right away," he added hastily. "I know you need time, but when you're ready, I'll be here." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving Zara standing on her front porch with more to think about than she had expected. Over the next few weeks, Zara established a new routine. Each morning she would help her mother with household tasks, then spend the afternoon either reading or working on her embroidery. Occasionally, she would walk into town, gradually growing accustomed to the curious stares and whispers that followed her. True to his word, Flynn didn't press his attentions on her, but she would often spot him in town, and he would always greet her with a tip of his hat and a warm smile that increasingly made her pulse quicken. One afternoon in early June, a knock at the door interrupted Zara's reading. She opened it to find Flynn standing on the porch, hat in hand. "Afternoon, Miss Jameson," he said formally, though his eyes held a warmth that belied his tone. "Mr. Decker," she replied, suddenly conscious of her simple house dress and loosely pinned hair. "This is a surprise." "I was hoping I might speak with your father," Flynn said, shifting slightly as though uncomfortable. "My father," Zara repeated, confused. "He's in his study. Please come in." She led Flynn to the study door and knocked. "Father, Flynn Decker is here to see you." Her father opened the door, surprise evident on his face. "Decker, what can I do for you? Could we speak privately, sir?" Flynn requested, his back straight, his hat still clutched in his hands. Her father raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Certainly, come in." The door closed, leaving Zara standing in the hallway, curiosity burning within her. What business could Flynn possibly have with her father? She paced the parlor, trying not to speculate but failing miserably. Nearly 30 minutes passed before the study door opened, and both men emerged. Her father looked thoughtful while Flynn's expression was impossible to read. "Zara," her father said, "Mr. Decker has something to ask you." Flynn stepped forward, his eyes meeting hers directly. "Miss Jameson, I was wondering if you might do me the honor of accompanying me to the town social this Saturday evening." Zara stared at him, then at her father, who gave a slight nod of approval. "You asked my father's permission to take me to a social?" she asked, incredulous. "I did," Flynn confirmed. "I know how things are done in town, and I don't want to cause any more gossip about you than there already is." The consideration behind his actions touched her. He was right. If he had simply asked her directly, it would have set tongues wagging even more than they already were. By approaching her father first, he was doing his best to protect her reputation. "I would be pleased to attend the social with you, Mr. Decker," she said formally, though she couldn't quite suppress the smile that tugged at her lips. Flynn's answering smile was quick and bright. "I'll call for you at 7 then." After he had gone, Zara turned to her father. "What did you and Flynn discuss for so long?" Her father's expression was unreadable. "The young man has ambitions, it seems, more than I gave him credit for." He paused, studying his daughter's face. "You care for him, don't you?" I'm not sure," Zara admitted. "But I would like the chance to find out." Her father nodded slowly. "He's not what your mother and I had envisioned for you, but after Blackwell's disgraceful behavior. Well, perhaps we were looking in the wrong direction all along." Saturday evening arrived with a flurry of activity as Zara prepared for the social. She chose her best dress, a pale green muslin that brought out the amber flecks in her hazel eyes, and allowed her mother to arrange her hair in an elegant style, adorned with a single white flower. "You look lovely, dear," her mother said, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. "But are you certain about this? It's only been a month since. Well, since the wedding that wasn't." "I'm certain, mother," Zara replied, smoothing her skirts. "Flynn is. He's different. He makes me feel safe." Her mother sighed. "I suppose that's something, and your father seems to have taken a liking to him, which I confess surprises me." The doorbell rang precisely at 7, and Zara's heart leaped in her chest. When she descended the stairs, she found Flynn standing in the foyer, looking remarkably handsome in a clean black suit that, while not new, fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His copper hair was neatly combed, and his jaw freshly shaved. "Miss Jameson," he said, his voice catching slightly as his eyes traveled over her. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "You look very handsome yourself." Her father cleared his throat. "Have her home by 10, Decker." "Yes, sir," Flynn agreed seriously. Not a minute later, the town hall was decorated with paper lanterns and wildflowers for the social, and a small band played lively tunes in the corner. As Zara entered on Flynn's arm, conversation faltered and heads turned in their direction. "Everyone's staring," she whispered. "Let them," Flynn replied, his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." They made their way through the crowd, stopping to exchange pleasantries with those who were polite enough to speak to them. Some people were clearly scandalized by Zara's appearance with another man so soon after being jilted, while others seemed genuinely pleased to see her out enjoying herself. "Would you like to dance?" Flynn asked when the band struck up a waltz. Zara hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I would." As Flynn led her onto the dance floor, his hand resting lightly at her waist, Zara was acutely aware of the eyes following them. But when he began to move, guiding her smoothly through the steps of the waltz, she found herself forgetting about the onlookers. "I didn't know you could dance," she said, surprised by his skill. A smile tugged at his lips. "There's a lot you don't know about me yet, Zara Jameson." "I'm beginning to realize that," she replied, feeling something shift between them as they moved in perfect harmony around the floor. Later, as they stood by the refreshment table, Zara spotted Zara Blackwell, Theodore's sister, watching them with undisguised hostility. "She looks like she'd like to poison my punch," Zara murmured. Flynn followed her gaze. "The Blackwells are a proud family. They don't like that you've moved on instead of pining away for their precious son." "I haven't moved on," Zara protested automatically, then paused, considering. "Or perhaps I have. I don't feel the same pain when I think of Theodore now." Flynn's eyes softened. "Good. He didn't deserve your pain." As the evening progressed, Zara found herself genuinely enjoying Flynn's company. He was attentive without being overbearing, respectful without being distant. They danced several more times, and when they weren't dancing, they talked about books they had read, about changes in the town, about their shared childhood memories. "You remember that time we found a nest of baby rabbits in the meadow behind your old house?" Flynn asked as they walked slowly around the edge of the dance floor. "I do," Zara smiled. "You built a little fence around it to keep predators away and checked on them every day until they were old enough to leave. You named each one," Flynn recalled, grinning. "Even though they all looked exactly alike." "They did not," Zara protested with a laugh. "Spot had that mark on his ear, and Thumper had the biggest feet." Flynn's laughter joined hers, drawing curious glances from nearby couples. "I'd forgotten how stubborn you could be when you set your mind to something." "I prefer to think of it as determination," she replied primly. though her eyes sparkled with amusement. Determination, then, he conceded, his gaze warm as it rested on her face. By the time Flynn escorted her home, Zara felt lighter than she had in months, perhaps even years. Standing on her front porch, she found herself reluctant for the evening to end. "Thank you, Flynn," she said softly. "I had a wonderful time." "So did I," he replied, his voice equally quiet in the still night air. "Might I call on you tomorrow afternoon? I thought perhaps we could ride out to Willow Creek again properly this time, not running away from a wedding." Zara smiled at his gentle teasing. "I'd like that very much." Flynn hesitated, then slowly reached out to touch her cheek, his fingers barely grazing her skin. "Good night, Zara." "Good night, Flynn," she whispered, her heart beating rapidly as he stepped back, tipped his hat, and walked away. Inside, her mother was waiting up for her, pretending to be absorbed in her needlework. "Did you have a nice time?" she asked, too casually. "Yes," Zara answered honestly. "The best time I've had in a very long while." Her mother set aside her sewing with a sigh. "Your father seems to think that Flynn Decker has prospects. He says the young man has been saving to buy his own ranch." "He hasn't mentioned that to me," Zara said, surprised. "Well, I suppose he wouldn't so early in your acquaintance." Her mother paused. "I just want you to be careful, Zara. You've been hurt once already." "Flynn is nothing like Theodore," Zara replied with certainty. "No," her mother agreed. "He certainly isn't, but that doesn't mean he can't hurt you in different ways." Zara considered her mother's words as she prepared for bed that night. It was true that Flynn Decker was as different from Theodore Blackwell as a man could be. Where Theodore had been polished and educated, Flynn was straightforward and had learned from life rather than books. Theodore had pursued her with calculated charm. Flynn offered simple honesty. And yet, her mother was right to counsel caution. Her heart had been broken once already. Was she ready to risk it again so soon? The next afternoon, Flynn arrived promptly at 2 o'clock, driving a smart buggy rather than the work wagon he had used on the day of the failed wedding. He had clearly taken care with his appearance, wearing a clean shirt and his best denims. "That's a fine buggy," Zara commented as he helped her up. "Borrowed it from Mr. Sanders at the Diamond Bar," Flynn explained. "Figured you deserved better than bouncing around in my old wagon." The thoughtfulness of the gesture warmed her. As they drove through town, heads turned to watch them pass, but Zara found she cared less about the stares and whispers than she had before. The countryside around Williams was at its most beautiful in early summer. Wildflowers dotted the landscape with splashes of color, and the heat of the day was tempered by a gentle breeze. When they reached Willow Creek, Flynn spread a blanket in the shade of the cottonwood trees and produced a picnic basket. "Did you make all this?" Zara asked, impressed by the sandwiches, pie, and lemonade he laid out. Flynn's ears turned slightly red. "The cook at the ranch helped. I told her it was important." "Important?" Zara echoed, her pulse quickening. "Yes," Flynn said simply, meeting her eyes. It's important to me, Zara." They ate their picnic, talking easily about Flynn's work at the ranch, about books Zara had been reading, about changes coming to Williams with the expected arrival of the railroad in the next few years. After they finished eating, they walked along the creek, stopping to skip stones across the water like they had as children. "You're still terrible at this," Flynn laughed as Zara's stone plopped directly into the water without skipping once. "I am not." She protested, selecting another stone with determination. This one skipped twice before sinking, and she turned to him triumphantly. "See? Impressive," he teased, then demonstrated his own skill with a stone that skipped 6 times before disappearing. "Show off," she muttered, but she was smiling. They wandered farther along the creek than Zara had been in years, eventually coming to a small ridge that overlooked the valley. "I'd forgotten how beautiful it is up here," Zara said, gazing out at the vista of mountains in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. "I come here sometimes to think," Flynn admitted, standing close beside her. "When things get too crowded or complicated back at the ranch or in town." "What do you think about?" she asked, turning to study his profile. Flynn was silent for a long moment before answering. "The future, mostly. What I want from life." "And what do you want?" Zara's voice was soft, carried away almost immediately by the gentle breeze. He turned to face her fully. "For a long time I wanted my own ranch, land that belonged to me, not someone else, a place where I could build something lasting. And now I want that more than ever," he said seriously. "But I also want someone to share it with." His blue eyes held her steadily. "Someone who can see beyond what a man is to what he might become." Zara's heart beat faster at the implication in his words. "Flynn, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I know it's too soon. I know you're still healing from what Blackwell did, but I want you to know that I'm patient, Zara. I can wait." The simple honesty of his declaration moved her more than any flowery speech Theodore had ever made. Without overthinking, she reached out and took his hand, her smaller fingers twining with his larger, work-roughened ones. "Thank you," she said softly. Flynn's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, slow and warm and full of promise. As summer progressed, Flynn became a regular visitor to the Jameson home. To Zara's surprise, her father increasingly welcomed his calls, often engaging Flynn in long conversations about ranching and the future of the territory. Her mother remained more reserved but gradually warmed to the young cowboy's straightforward manner and obvious devotion to Zara. July brought scorching heat to Williams, turning the streets dusty and driving people indoors during the hottest part of the day. One particularly sweltering afternoon, Zara was helping her mother preserve peaches when a commotion outside drew them to the window. A stagecoach had pulled up in front of the general store, and several passengers were disembarking, including a tall, elegantly dressed man who looked strangely familiar. "Is that?" her mother began, squinting against the bright sunlight. Zara felt her blood run cold. "Theodore," she whispered. After 3 months in California, Theodore Blackwell had returned to Williams. Zara watched, frozen, as he spoke briefly to the stage driver, then collected his luggage and headed toward the Blackwell family home at the other end of town. "What is he doing back here?" her mother demanded, indignation coloring her voice. "The nerve of that man!" Zara couldn't answer. She was too busy trying to identify the emotion coursing through her. It wasn't pain or longing as she might have expected. Instead, she felt a curious detachment, as though watching a stranger arrive in town. "I should tell your father," her mother said, already untying her apron. "He'll want to know that scoundrel has dared to show his face in Williams again." "Wait," Zara said, catching her mother's arm. "Let's not make a fuss. If Theodore thinks his return upsets us, it gives him power he doesn't deserve." Her mother looked at her with surprise, then nodded slowly. "You've changed, Zara." "Yes," she agreed quietly. "I believe I have." News of Theodore's return spread through Williams like wildfire. By evening, Flynn had heard and rode immediately to the Jameson house, concern evident on his face as Zara met him at the door. "Are you all right?" he asked without preamble. "I'm fine," she assured him, touched by his concern. "Truly?" Flynn studied her face as though searching for signs of distress. "If he tries to speak to you, I can handle Theodore Blackwell," Zara interrupted firmly. "But thank you for your concern." Flynn's tense expression eased somewhat. "I know you can handle yourself. I just don't like the idea of him causing you more pain." He can't hurt me anymore, she said with quiet certainty. That part of my life is over. 2 days later, Zara was shopping in Johnson's general store when the bell above the door chimed, and Theodore Blackwell walked in. The store fell silent as everyone turned to watch the drama unfold. Theodore spotted her immediately, and a practiced smile spread across his handsome face. "Zara," he said, moving toward her as though they were old friends meeting after a brief separation. "How lovely to see you." Zara straightened her spine and met his gaze coolly. "Mr. Blackwell," she acknowledged with a slight nod, deliberately using his formal name. Theodore's smile faltered slightly. "I had hoped we might speak privately." "There are things I wish to explain. I don't believe we have anything to discuss," Zara cut in, her voice calm but firm. "If you'll excuse me." She moved to step around him, but Theodore caught her arm. "Please, Zara, I made a terrible mistake. I've come back to make things right." Before Zara could respond, the door opened again, and Flynn entered. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Theodore's hand on Zara's arm, and he moved swiftly to her side. "Everything all right, Zara?" he asked, his voice deceptively casual though his eyes never left Theodore's face. Theodore released her arm, his expression hardening as he recognized Flynn. "This doesn't concern you, Decker." "I believe it does," Flynn replied evenly, placing himself slightly in front of Zara in a protective stance that wasn't lost on anyone in the store. Theodore glanced between them, comprehension dawning on his face. "I see," he said coldly. "You certainly didn't waste any time, did you, Zara?" "That's enough," Flynn growled, taking a step forward. Zara placed a restraining hand on Flynn's arm. "It's all right," she said quietly, then turned to Theodore. "You made your choice 3 months ago, Mr. Blackwell. I've made mine." She slipped her hand into Flynn's, the gesture deliberate and unmistakable. "Now, if you'll excuse us." Without waiting for a response, she walked out of the store with Flynn, leaving Theodore staring after them and the other customers buzzing with fresh gossip. "I'm proud of you," Flynn said as they walked down the street. "Not many would have handled that with such dignity." 3 months ago, I wouldn't have, Zara admitted. "I would have either burst into tears or created a scene. And now," she smiled up at him, still holding his hand, "now I know what I want, and it isn't Theodore Blackwell." Flynn's answering smile was slow and full of promise. "Good to know." Theodore made several more attempts to speak with Zara over the next week, sending notes that she returned unopened and even calling at her home, only to be turned away by her father with barely concealed contempt. Finally, he cornered her after church on Sunday, approaching her while she waited for her parents to finish speaking with the minister. "You're being unreasonable," he said without preamble. "At least hear what I have to say." Zara sighed, realizing that the quickest way to be rid of him was to listen. "Very well, Theodore, speak your piece." Encouraged by this small concession, Theodore launched into a clearly rehearsed speech. "I panicked, Zara. The responsibility of marriage, of settling down, it overwhelmed me. I thought I needed to see more of the world before I committed myself. But California was a disappointment. Nothing there compared to what I left behind here." "You mean your family's standing in the community," Zara observed shrewdly. "Your father's business." Theodore had the grace to look slightly abashed. "That's part of it, yes, but I also missed you. We were good together, Zara. We made sense." "No, Theodore," she said gently, feeling a surprising amount of pity for him. "We never made sense. I was just too blind to see it. Because of Decker." Theodore's voice hardened. "What can he offer you that I can't? He's a nobody, a cowhand with big dreams and empty pockets." "He offers honesty," Zara replied simply, "and respect, and a love that doesn't falter when tested." She smiled, the truth of her words settling comfortably in her heart. "Goodbye, Theodore. I wish you well, truly." She walked away, leaving him standing alone in the churchyard, and for the first time since that terrible day in May, Zara felt completely free of the past. That evening, Flynn came to call, and they sat together on the front porch swing, enjoying the cooler air as twilight descended on Williams. "I spoke with Theodore after church today," Zara said, watching Flynn's profile carefully. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "What did he want?" "To explain, to apologize, to win me back." She took Flynn's hand. "I told him goodbye." Flynn turned to her, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. "Are you sure that's what you want?" "Very sure," Zara replied without hesitation. Flynn's free hand came up to cup her cheek gently. "Zara Jameson, I've been in love with you since we were children. I never thought I'd have a chance to tell you that, much less have you listen. But I'm telling you now I love you, and if you'll give me time to make something of myself, to build a life worthy of you, Flynn," she interrupted softly, "you already are worthy, more than worthy." The kiss that followed was gentle, a promise rather than a demand, and when they drew apart, Zara knew with absolute certainty that she had found what she had always been looking for, though she hadn't recognized it until now. As summer gave way to autumn, Theodore Blackwell departed Williams once more, this time heading east to Boston. The town gradually lost interest in the scandal of the aborted wedding as new dramas and gossip emerged to capture their attention. Flynn continued to court Zara openly, calling at her home several times a week and escorting her to every social event in town. Under her father's guidance, he began learning about business management to complement his ranching skills, and by October, he had saved enough to make an offer on a small but promising piece of land 10 miles outside Williams. "It's not much yet," he told Zara as they rode out to see it together one crisp autumn day. "But the water rights are good, and the grazing land is better than it looks. In a few years, with hard work." "It's perfect," Zara said, looking out over the rolling landscape with its scattered pines and distant view of the mountains. "I can already see a house right there on that rise." Flynn's eyes lit up at her words. "You can?" "Yes," she replied, turning to him with a smile. "A simple house at first, but with room to grow, and a big porch facing west to watch the sunsets." Flynn dismounted from his horse and helped her down from her mount, his hands lingering at her waist. "Zara," he said, his voice suddenly serious, "I don't want to rush you. I know it's only been 6 months since the wedding. That wasn't," she finished for him. "I know. But sometimes, Flynn, when something is right, you just know it." He searched her face, hope kindling in his eyes. "And this it feels right to you." "More right than anything ever has," she answered honestly. Flynn reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn velvet box. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment," he admitted. "It's not fancy like the one Blackwell gave you. It belonged to my mother, and her mother before that." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a single pearl. Zara felt tears spring to her eyes at the sight, not for the ring's simplicity, but for the history and meaning it carried. "Zara Jameson," Flynn said, dropping to one knee before her, "I promise to love you every day of my life, to build a home and a future with you, to never leave you standing alone. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, her heart so full she could barely speak. "Yes, Flynn Decker, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Zara thought of that day in May when she had fled the church in her wedding dress, heartbroken and humiliated. She would never have imagined then that Theodore's desertion would lead her to the greatest happiness she had ever known. "What are you thinking?" Flynn asked, rising to his feet and drawing her into his arms. "I was thinking about what you said the day Theodore left me at the altar," she replied, looking up at him with a smile. His loss is my invitation, Flynn grinned. Best words I ever spoke. I agree, Zara said, reaching up to pull him down for a kiss that sealed their promise to each other beneath the vast Arizona sky. They were married on a bright December day in 1878, 6 months after the wedding that never happened. The church in Williams was decorated simply with pine boughs and red berries. And this time, when Zara walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she had no doubt that the man waiting for her at the altar would be there. Flynn's eyes never left her as she approached, his face alight with a love so pure and strong that it brought tears to the eyes of even the most cynical townsfolk. When she reached him, he took her hands in his and whispered, "You came." "I'll always come to you," she promised. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When they exchanged vows, Zara's voice was clear and certain, all traces of her earlier heartbreak gone. Flynn's hands were steady as he placed the gold band on her finger beside his mother's pearl ring. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Flynn gathered Zara gently in his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of both passion and reverence. The church erupted in applause, and as they turned to face their friends and family, Zara caught sight of her mother wiping away tears of joy. The reception was held at the Jameson home, with tables set up in the garden despite the December chill. Lanterns hung from tree branches, casting a warm glow over the festivities as people ate, drank, and danced in celebration of the new couple. "Happy?" Flynn asked as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. "Completely," Zara replied, her eyes shining. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he admitted, pulling her closer. Later, as they prepared to depart for their new home, a small cabin on their ranch property that Flynn had worked tirelessly to prepare, Zara's father pulled Flynn aside for a private word. "Take care of her," he said simply. "With my life, sir," Flynn promised. Her mother embraced her tearfully. "I was wrong about him," she whispered in Zara's ear. "He's a good man and he loves you truly." "I know," Zara replied, hugging her mother tightly. As Flynn helped her into the wagon that would take them to their new home, Zara looked back at the gathering of friends and family, at the town of Williams where she had grown up, at the life she was leaving behind. Then she looked at Flynn, at the future they would build together, and knew she was making the right choice. The journey to their ranch took just over an hour, and night had fallen completely by the time they arrived. Flynn insisted on carrying her over the threshold of their small cabin, making her laugh as he nearly banged her head on the doorframe. "Welcome home, Mrs. Decker," he said, setting her down carefully inside. The cabin was simple but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, and a bed in the corner covered with a handmade quilt. "It's not much yet," Flynn said, suddenly anxious as he watched her take it all in. "But come spring, we can start building the bigger house, the one on the rise like you described." Zara turned to him, her heart overflowing with love for this man who had saved her in more ways than one. "It's perfect, Flynn. It's ours." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new home, Zara traced the strong lines of her husband's face with gentle fingers. "What are you thinking?" Flynn murmured, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "I'm thinking about how sometimes what seems like the worst day of your life can lead to the best," she answered thoughtfully. "If Theodore hadn't left me at the altar, I might never have seen what was right in front of me all along." Flynn gathered her closer. "Then I suppose I owe Blackwell my thanks, though I doubt he'd appreciate hearing it." Zara laughed softly. "Probably not." "I meant what I said in my vows today," Flynn said, his voice growing serious. "I will love you every day of my life, Zara Decker. That's a promise I intend to keep." "And I'll hold you to it," she replied, sealing her words with a kiss that spoke of all the days and years that lay ahead of them. Spring 1879 brought new growth to the Decker ranch. The winter had been challenging, with heavy snows and bitter cold testing the resolve of the newlyweds. But they had faced each hardship together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. As the snow melted and wildflowers began to carpet the landscape, Flynn and Zara started work on their permanent home. Flynn had hired 2 experienced builders from Williams to help with the structure, but much of the work was done by his own hands, with Zara assisting where she could. By June, the framework of the house stood proudly on the rise overlooking their property. One evening, after a long day of work, Zara and Flynn sat on a stack of lumber, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "It's going to be everything we dreamed," Zara said, leaning her head against Flynn's shoulder. "And more," he agreed, his arm around her waist. "I've been thinking about adding a nursery off our bedroom." Zara looked up at him, a slow smile spreading across her face. "That's fortunate timing, then." Flynn's brow furrowed in confusion, then cleared as understanding dawned. "Zara, are you saying?" She nodded, joy bubbling up inside her. The baby should arrive in January. With a whoop that startled a nearby flock of birds into flight, Flynn lifted her off her feet and spun her around. "A baby, our baby," Zara laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "Yes, our baby. Now put me down before you make me dizzy." He set her gently on her feet but kept his arms around her. "Are you feeling all right? Should you be helping with the house? Maybe you should rest more, Flynn," she interrupted with an indulgent smile. "I'm with child, not made of glass. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, many of them while working far harder than I am." He looked chastened but still concerned. "I just want to take care of you both." "And you will," she assured him, touching his cheek. "But right now, the best thing for me is to stay active and keep helping you build our home. By the time winter comes and the baby is nearly here, we'll need that roof over our heads." Flynn nodded, though she could tell he would be watching her like a hawk in the months to come. "A father," he said wonderingly. "I'm going to be a father." Zara's heart swelled with love for the man who had stood by her when she needed him most, who was building a life with her brick by brick, dream by dream. And a wonderful one at that. News of the coming baby spread quickly through Williams, adding to the town's growing respect for the young couple. Zara's mother began knitting baby clothes, and her father surprised them by having a beautiful wooden cradle delivered to the ranch, handcrafted by the town's most skilled carpenter. "Your grandfather made one like this for you," he explained gruffly when Zara thanked him with tears in her eyes. Seemed right to continue the tradition. By September, the house was nearly complete. It was a simple but solid structure, with a large main room that combined kitchen and living areas, 2 bedrooms, and the promised wide porch facing west. As Flynn had promised, there was a small nursery adjoining their bedroom, painted a cheerful yellow by Zara's own hand. "It's perfect," she said, standing in the doorway of the nursery as Flynn put the finishing touches on the window frame. Her hand rested on her growing belly, where their child was making its presence known with increasingly vigorous movements. "Just wait until you see the surprise I've been working on," Flynn replied with a grin. "Close your eyes." Zara obliged, allowing Flynn to guide her carefully through the house and onto the front porch. "Can I look now?" "Not yet." She heard him moving something, then felt him position her just so. "All right, open them." Zara opened her eyes to find herself seated in a beautifully crafted rocking chair, its wood smooth and polished, with cushions sewn in her favorite blue fabric. "Flynn," she breathed, running her hands over the curved arms. "Did you make this?" He nodded, looking both proud and slightly embarrassed by her obvious delight. "Been working on it in the barn when you weren't looking. Mr. Peterson from town gave me some pointers, but I wanted to build it myself, for you and the baby." Zara pulled him down for a kiss, her heart too full for words. As the baby kicked against her ribs, she guided Flynn's hand to the spot. "I think someone else approves as well." Flynn's face lit with wonder as he felt their child move beneath his palm. "Strong like its mother," he said softly. On a snowy night in January 1880, with a midwife from Williams in attendance and Flynn pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door, Zara gave birth to a healthy baby boy whom they named James William Decker James, after Zara's father and William after the town where they had found each other. "He's perfect," Flynn whispered when the midwife finally allowed him into the room. He approached the bed with reverence, gazing down at his exhausted wife and the tiny bundle in her arms. "Would you like to hold your son?" Zara asked, smiling despite her fatigue. Flynn carefully took the baby, his large hands gentle as they cradled the small form. "Hello, James," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I'm your pa." As she watched her husband with their son, Zara thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from the humiliation of being left at the altar to the joy of finding true love in the most unexpected place. If she could go back in time and change that painful day, she wouldn't. Every tear, every heartache had led her here, to this perfect moment with the family she was meant to have. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Decker family. The ranch prospered under Flynn's careful management, growing from a small homestead to a respectable operation with a herd of cattle and several hired hands. Zara kept the books for the ranch and maintained a large vegetable garden that supplied not only their table but also provided produce to sell in town. James grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his mother's hazel eyes and his father's copper hair. When he was 4, he was joined by a sister, Emma Rose, who from her earliest days showed signs of having inherited her mother's determination and her father's love of the land. In the spring of 1885, 7 years after that fateful day when Theodore Blackwell had failed to appear at the church, Zara stood on the porch of their home, watching Flynn teach 6-year-old James how to ride his first pony. Emma, not quite 2, sat on her mother's hip, clapping her hands in delight as her brother trotted in a careful circle under their father's watchful eye. "Mama, look at me," James called, his face alight with pride. "I see you, sweetheart," Zara called back. "You're doing wonderfully." Flynn looked up, catching her eye across the yard, and the love in his gaze still had the power to make her heart skip a beat. 7 years of marriage, 2 children, countless challenges overcome together. And still, when he looked at her like that, she felt like the young woman who had placed her trembling hand in his and let him lead her away from heartbreak and toward a future brighter than she could have imagined. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Zara and Flynn sat together on the porch swing, her head on his shoulder as they watched the stars emerge in the clear Arizona sky. "Any regrets?" Flynn asked, his arm warm around her waist. Zara thought about the question seriously, considering the life they had built together. "Not one," she answered honestly. Flynn's laugh was soft in the darkness. "Only that I waited so long to speak up. Should have said something the moment I saw you in that wedding dress, running from the church." "You did say something," Zara reminded him, smiling at the memory. "His loss is my invitation. I'll never forget those words." "Best gamble I ever took," Flynn admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I was terrified you'd slap me and keep running." "I considered it," she teased, nestling closer to his side. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, rocking gently as the moon rose over the mountains. In the distance, a coyote called, the sound lonely but beautiful in the vast night. "I saw Theodore in town last week," Flynn said suddenly. "He was passing through on business." Zara looked up, surprised. "You didn't mention it." Flynn shrugged. "Didn't seem important. He asked about you, though." "What did you tell him?" she asked, curious rather than concerned. "I told him you were happy," Flynn replied simply. "That we have 2 beautiful children and a good life together." He seemed regretful. "As well he should," Zara said without rancor. "But I hope he finds happiness too someday." Flynn's arms tightened around her. "You're a better person than I am. I confess I took some satisfaction in seeing his face when I told him about our life." Zara laughed softly. "Well, perhaps I'm not entirely without spite myself. I wouldn't mind if he occasionally thinks about what he lost." "Oh, he does," Flynn assured her. "Trust me on that." They fell silent again, content in each other's company as the night deepened around them. Eventually, Flynn stood and offered Zara his hand. "Come to bed, Mrs. Decker." "Gladly, Mr. Decker," she replied, placing her hand in his as she had that day 7 years ago, when he had offered her escape from humiliation, and unwittingly given her the greatest gift of all, the chance to discover where true love had been waiting all along. As they walked into their home, arms around each other's waists, Zara sent a silent thanks to the man who had abandoned her at the altar. His greatest mistake had become her greatest blessing, leading her to the life and the love she was always meant to find. And in the years that followed, whenever Zara and Flynn told the story of how they came to be together, they would always smile at each other with the same private understanding that sometimes the most painful endings can lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Their love story, born from heartbreak but built on honesty, respect, and unwavering commitment, would be told and retold in Williams for generations to come, a testament to the unexpected ways that true love can find its way home.